Amazon CloudFront is about delivering content to users around the world. So by content, I mean things like videos, pictures, files, any kind of file type basically. And what you're doing by using CloudFront is trying to improve the performance of retrieving those files for users around the world. So let's, for example, say that you have some kind of photo sharing application and you've got users all over the world. Well, if your photos are actually stored in an Amazon S3 bucket in the US, and lots of your users are coming from Asia and Australia and places like that, then that's a big physical distance. So they're going to suffer with latency, which means it's going to slow down the performance for them. So what you can do with CloudFront is you can actually have that content moved around the world. So let's see how that works. In CloudFront, you create something called an origin. So this is where your files are actually coming from. It can be Amazon S3, it can be an EC2 instance, you can have a load balancer in front of it as well. So this is your source, this is your origin. Then you have what are called edge locations. I think there's at least 180 of these around the world, and these are separate to regions and availability zones. They're another place where Amazon has some infrastructure. So your data actually gets cached in these places. So in other words, if you've got files for your photo sharing application, those files get sent down to the edge locations all around the world. And that means that they're closer to the users. So as I said, there's probably at least 180, and that's a lot of them. They're spread all over the world. So you should be able to get your content close to your users almost wherever they are. So then your users in those regions will then be able to access that data. So maybe these users here are in the US and they're connecting to a local edge location. These users might be in Africa, these users in Europe, and so on. So the users get directed to the nearest edge location. So that's in a nutshell how it works. And what we'll do now is go over to the console and we're going to create a CloudFront distribution. I'm in S3 now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the cloudforbeginners.net bucket. So let's go into this bucket and we need to make some configuration changes. So firstly, what I want to do is go to permissions, edit the block public access, turn that off because we want to make this public, and we're going to confirm these changes. Click on confirm and then go to access control list, public access, list objects, click on save. And so that makes our bucket public, or it gives it the ability to be public. We still need to actually upload our objects and make them public. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some files. And you'll find these in the directory CloudFront. And let's copy all of these files. Click on choose and then upload. And then we're going to select each of these files and choose to make public. So now each of these should have the correct permissions. If we just check the permissions here, it will also have read object for everybody. So these are public objects. The next thing we're going to do is head back up to the bucket level, go to serve static website hosting, click on use this bucket to host a website, and we're going to type in index.html and error.html. So those are our documents that we just created. And that means we'll now have a website. So let's save that. And then what we're going to do is just check and see if we can go to this address. And this is what we see. So it's pretty much the same as we had earlier on, except it's got an image in it. Now what I'm going to do is just right click and inspect. And that might be a bit different depending on what browser you're in, but you want to browse the source. So in this case, we can see that there's an image. And if I click on that image here, we can actually see the URL for that image. So we can see that this is cloudforbeginners.net.s3-website. So we can see that this object is actually being pulled from an Amazon S3 bucket. So next, what we're going to do is create our CloudFront distribution. So we're going to go down to networking and content delivery, choose CloudFront, click on create distribution, and then we click on get started. Now there's two different types of distribution at the moment, but as you can see, they're discontinuing this real-time media protocol option. So now you've only got the option really going forward of using what's called a web distribution. That's the most common one you'll use for most use cases. So in here, if you just click, you'll find some options come up. And in here you can see our buckets. So I've got the cloudforbeginners.net bucket. I'm going to choose that one. And then I'm going to select yes, restrict bucket access, create a new identity. So an origin access identity, what this will do is it will mean that people can only reach our bucket through CloudFront. And this creates a special user account which allows CloudFront to be able to access the bucket by creating a policy. And we'll grant permissions on the bucket. That's the policy I mentioned. Let's scroll down a bit further. Pretty much everything else can be the same. There's a few options here around controlling the methods that are used, like and whether you could use HTTP or HTTPS. We've got some encryption options, caching policies. If we scroll down a bit further, we can then choose the pricing associated with our distribution. So for best performance, it will cache our objects in all edge locations, but you can select it to one of these geographic options as well. I'll just leave it on the default. We won't have this running for too long anyway. And we're going to leave the rest of the defaults for now and click on Create Distribution. Now, CloudFront distributions do take a bit of time. You can head up to distributions here and you'll see it in progress, and that can take 10 to 15 minutes. My CloudFront distribution is now available, and just scrolling across here we can see that the status is deployed and the state is enabled. So that's all good. And what I want to do is I'm going to copy this domain name here. So this is the domain name to actually access your CloudFront distribution. So I've copied that to my clipboard and I'm going to open a new tab and go to this address. So let's see, if we just put this address in, and I'm actually going to use HTTPS and hit enter. And what we actually see is this XML file. And you can see in here, it's just basically telling you what's in the bucket. So we got a list bucket, and then the result is, and it gives you the various keys. So those are the objects. So you can see the key error.html, the key index.html, and mountain.jpg. So what we actually need to do is just put /index.html on the end of the URL. So I'm just going to type /index.html, hit enter, and there we've got our image. So now we're actually accessing a different URL. So we're actually using the CloudFront URL. Now if I right click and inspect element, what we can see is we obviously still see the same image, but if I click on that image, you can see that it doesn't any longer have the S3 path in here. And sure enough, here you can see that we actually have the URL for CloudFront. And then if I hover over the object, you can see that the URL for the object as well is a CloudFront URL. So it's the CloudFront URL /mountain.jpg. So that tells us that our image as well as our index.html file are actually being served from CloudFront. So I'm in Australia, so it's probably going to be an edge location somewhere near me. If you were now somewhere else in the world trying to access this same URL, you would have those objects served to you from a local edge location. So that's how it all works. And what we're going to do is we'll leave our distribution running, and in the next lesson we're going to add a custom domain name. So we're going to use the domain that we registered, if you registered a domain earlier in the course. If you didn't, just follow along and watch what I do. But otherwise, if you did register a domain name, we're going to actually add that domain name as well as having a custom SSL certificate for our website.